Inexperienced shooter connects at 3,700. Battle-hardened expert shocked. Jake Martinez had never fired a rifle before joining the military 2 months ago. At 22 years old, he grew up in downtown Chicago where the closest thing to hunting was catching pigeons on fire escapes. His hands shook the first time he held an M4 carbine during basic training, and his drill sergeant often joked that Jake couldn't hit the broadside of a barn if he was standing inside it. The other recruits came from different backgrounds. Some grew up on farms, hunting deer with their fathers since they were 10. Others spent weekends at shooting ranges, perfecting their aim with expensive equipment. Jake felt like an outsider among these natural-born shooters who seemed to understand wind patterns and bullet trajectories like they were reading a simple book. During marksmanship training, Jake struggled with the fundamentals. His breathing was wrong, his stance was awkward, and his trigger control made veteran instructors wince. While his fellow soldiers consistently hit targets at 300 meters, Jake celebrated when he managed to hit anything at 100 meters. The shooting instructors moved him to remedial training twice, working extra hours to help him meet minimum standards. Despite his poor performance, Jake possessed something his instructors couldn't teach: an unusual calmness under pressure. When other recruits panicked during surprise drills or stressful situations, Jake maintained steady nerves. He absorbed criticism without getting defensive and kept practicing even when others gave up on him. His determination impressed the staff even if his shooting scores didn't. 3 weeks before graduation from basic training, Jake's unit received news that changed everything. They were being deployed to Afghanistan ahead of schedule due to an urgent need for additional personnel. The announcement sent ripples of excitement and fear through the barracks. For Jake, it meant he would face real combat situations with barely adequate shooting skills. The night before deployment, Jake sat alone in the mess hall, staring at his rifle cleaning kit. Sergeant Rodriguez, his marksmanship instructor, approached and sat down across from him. Rodriguez had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen everything. "Martinez," Rodriguez said, his voice serious but kind, "I know you're worried about your shooting, but combat isn't always about being the best marksman on the range. Sometimes it's about being in the right place at the right time, staying calm when others lose their heads, and taking the shot when it matters most." Jake looked up from his cleaning kit, uncertainty written across his face. He had improved during training, but he still ranked in the bottom quarter of his class for marksmanship. The thought of letting down his teammates in actual combat kept him awake at night. "What if I freeze up?" Jake asked. "What if someone gets hurt because I can't make the shot?" Rodriguez leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped together. "Fear is normal, son. Every good soldier feels it. The difference between a hero and a casualty sometimes comes down to muscle memory and trusting your training, even when your brain is screaming at you to run." That night, Jake practiced his breathing exercises and dry-fired his rifle in the barracks until lights out. He visualized different scenarios, imagining himself staying calm and controlled under fire. Other soldiers played cards or wrote letters home, but Jake focused entirely on preparing his mind for what lay ahead. The transport plane to Afghanistan was filled with nervous energy. Some soldiers slept, others talked loudly to mask their anxiety, and a few stared silently out the small windows. Jake found himself thinking about his family back in Chicago, his mother who worked double shifts at the hospital, his younger sister who was starting college, and his father who had passed away when Jake was 16. His father had been a police officer who never owned a gun at home, believing that weapons should stay at work. Jake wondered what his father would think about his son becoming a soldier, carrying a rifle thousands of miles from home. Would he be proud that Jake was serving his country, or worried that his inexperienced son was heading into danger? As the plane descended toward Bagram Airfield, Jake checked his equipment one final time. His rifle was clean, his ammunition properly stored, and his gear secured according to regulations. He might not be the best shooter in his unit, but he was determined to be the most prepared. The plane touched down on the dusty runway with a jarring thud that jolted everyone awake. Through the small windows, Jake could see the harsh landscape of Afghanistan, brown mountains rising against a pale sky, dust swirling in the hot wind, and the sprawling military base that would be their home for the next year. Walking down the aircraft stairs, Jake felt the desert heat hit him like opening an oven door. The air was thin and dry, completely different from the humid summers he knew in Chicago. Other soldiers around him complained about the temperature and the smell of diesel fuel mixed with dust, but Jake found himself oddly focused. Something about this place demanded complete attention and respect. Forward Operating Base Thunder sat in a valley surrounded by jagged mountains that looked like broken teeth against the sky. Jake's unit, Alpha Company, was assigned to this remote outpost where 43 soldiers maintained security for a strategic supply route. The base consisted of concrete barriers, sandbags, and prefabricated buildings that baked in the desert sun during the day and turned ice-cold at night. Jake's first week involved learning the base layout, standing guard duty, and adjusting to the altitude. The mountains around them rose over 8,000 feet above sea level, making every breath feel thin and insufficient. Simple tasks like carrying ammunition boxes left him winded, while soldiers from Colorado and Montana adapted quickly to the elevation. The enemy in this region was elusive and patient. Taliban fighters knew these mountains like their own backyard, appearing suddenly to attack convoys or launch mortars at the base before vanishing into caves and hidden trails. They were expert marksmen who had been fighting in this terrain for decades, making every movement outside the base walls potentially deadly. Captain Williams, the commanding officer, was a veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan with 12 years of combat experience. He had seen countless young soldiers arrive full of training and textbook knowledge, only to discover that real combat followed no manual. Williams noticed Jake's nervousness but also recognized something valuable. The young soldier listened carefully to briefings and asked thoughtful questions instead of trying to appear tough. During his second week, Jake was assigned to a sniper team as a spotter, working with Staff Sergeant Chen, a marksman with over 200 confirmed kills. Chen was known throughout the base for his ability to make impossible shots in difficult conditions. He could hit targets at distances that seemed magical to inexperienced soldiers, adjusting for wind, elevation, and temperature changes with mathematical precision. "Your job isn't to shoot," Chen explained as they set up their position on the base's highest watchtower. "Your job is to see everything I might miss. Use the spotting scope, call out wind changes, watch for movement in areas I'm not covering. A good spotter is worth 10 mediocre shooters." Jake learned to use the advanced optics and range-finding equipment that made precise long-distance shooting possible. The spotting scope could magnify distant objects 25 times, revealing details invisible to the naked eye. He studied topographical maps, memorizing the distances to various landmarks and potential hiding spots in the surrounding mountains. Chen was a patient teacher who explained how altitude affected bullet trajectory, how morning and evening light could create optical illusions, and why shots that seemed impossible might actually be the easiest ones to make. Jake absorbed this knowledge eagerly, filling a notebook with calculations, wind charts, and sketches of the surrounding terrain. The longest confirmed kill in military history was made at 3,540 meters by a Canadian sniper in Iraq, Chen told him during one of their observation shifts. "Most people think that's impossible, but with the right conditions, proper equipment, and perfect execution, the mathematics work out. Distance isn't the enemy, impatience and poor fundamentals are." Jake's role as spotter allowed him to observe Chen's shooting process without the pressure of making shots himself. He watched how Chen controlled his breathing, how he positioned his body to minimize movement, and how he seemed to enter a state of complete focus before pulling the trigger. Every successful shot followed the same methodical pattern. The base's other snipers were equally impressive. Corporal Davis had grown up hunting elk in Montana and could estimate distances by sight with remarkable accuracy. Sergeant Murphy from Texas could hit moving targets that other shooters couldn't even see clearly. These men represented the elite of military marksmanship, each with years of experience and natural ability. Jake felt intimidated working alongside such skilled professionals, but he found his niche in observation and analysis. His eyes were sharp and his mind naturally organized the chaos of watching multiple areas simultaneously. Chen began relying on Jake's ability to spot subtle movements and changes in the environment that might indicate enemy activity. During their third week together, Jake noticed something unusual while scanning the mountains through his spotting scope. A glint of metal appeared briefly in a rock formation approximately 2,800 meters away, far beyond normal engagement range. Most soldiers would have dismissed it as sunlight reflecting off natural minerals, But Jake had been studying these mountains daily and knew this particular area well. "Sergeant Chen," Jake whispered into his radio, "I've got possible movement in Sector 7. Grid reference 234187. Intermittent metallic reflection. Appears to be observing our patrol route." Chen swung his rifle toward the indicated area and peered through his scope. After several minutes of careful observation, he confirmed Jake's suspicion. An enemy spotter was positioned in what appeared to be a perfect hide, probably gathering intelligence about base operations and patrol schedules. The distance was extreme, even for Chen's considerable abilities. Factors like air density at high altitude, wind patterns that changed as they moved up the mountain slopes, and the angle of the shot made this an extraordinarily difficult target. Most military engagements occurred at distances under 600 meters, making this potential shot more than 4 times beyond normal range. Chen began calculating the various factors that would affect bullet trajectory over such a distance. The .338 Lapua Magnum round he was using would drop significantly over 2,800 meters, requiring precise elevation adjustments. The bullet would also be affected by the Coriolis effect, the rotation of the Earth itself, over such an extended flight path. "Jake," Chen said quietly, "this shot is beyond my effective range given current conditions. We need to call in artillery or air support to deal with that position." But as Chen reached for his radio to request a fire mission, Jake noticed something that changed everything. The enemy position was located directly above a narrow valley, where their supply convoy was scheduled to travel in 30 minutes. If hostile forces were planning an ambush, dozens of American soldiers would be driving directly into a trap. "Sergeant, look at the patrol route," Jake said urgently. "That position gives them perfect overwatch of the entire convoy path. If they have a team positioned down there with RPGs or IEDs, our guys won't have anywhere to take cover." Chen cursed under his breath as he realized the implications. Artillery would take 20 minutes to coordinate, and air support wasn't immediately available. The convoy was already en route and couldn't be recalled without compromising other operations. Someone needed to eliminate that enemy observer before he could coordinate an attack on American forces. The weight of responsibility settled on both soldiers as they realized that preventing a potential disaster might require attempting an impossible shot. Chen grabbed his radio and attempted to contact the convoy directly, but the mountains interfered with communications. The convoy was operating in a radio shadow zone, where their standard equipment couldn't reach the base reliably. Alternative communication methods would take precious minutes to establish, time they didn't have if an ambush was being coordinated. "Jake, I need you to get on the long-range radio and try to reach convoy leader," Chen ordered, his voice tight with urgency. "Tell them about possible contact in Grid 7 and recommend they alter their route if feasible." Jake sprinted across the watchtower to the communications equipment while Chen continued observing the enemy position. The long-range radio crackled with static, and Jake spent crucial minutes adjusting frequencies and power levels. Finally, he made contact with the convoy's radio operator, but the message he received back was devastating. "Thunderbase, this is Convoy 6-4. We copy your warning, but route alteration is not possible at this time. We're carrying time-sensitive medical supplies to forward operating base Crystal. Alternative routes would add 4 hours to our travel time. Request you eliminate the threat or provide immediate air support." Chen closed his eyes when Jake relayed the message. The convoy was carrying wounded soldiers who needed immediate medical attention. Delaying their arrival by taking a longer route could cost American lives just as certainly as driving into an ambush. The choice was between risking an attack on the convoy or attempting an impossible shot. "Command, this is Thunder 7, Chen radioed to the base operations center. "We have positive identification of enemy spotter at extreme range. Requesting immediate air support or artillery on grid reference 234187. The response came back quickly. "Thunder 7, air support is unavailable for another 45 minutes. Artillery team is currently supporting operations in Sector 12. You are authorized to engage the target with available resources." Jake felt his stomach drop as he realized what available resources meant. Chen was an excellent marksman, but even he had limitations. The target was positioned at 2,800 meters in difficult terrain, with unpredictable wind conditions. Making this shot would require not just skill, but an extraordinary combination of preparation, luck, and perfect execution. Chen began setting up for what he knew might be the most difficult shot of his career. He adjusted his rifle's bipod legs to achieve perfect stability, checked his scope's elevation and windage settings, and pulled out his range cards to verify the distance calculation. Every movement was precise and methodical, following procedures that had been drilled into him through years of training. "Jake, I need continuous wind calls," Chen said, settling behind his rifle. "Watch for any changes in vegetation movement, dust patterns, or mirage effects. This bullet will be in flight for over 4 seconds, so wind conditions can change multiple times during the shot." Jake pressed his eye to the spotting scope and began scanning the terrain between their position and the target. The wind was relatively calm near their location, but he could see dust swirling in the valley below and vegetation moving differently at various elevations on the mountainside. Calculating wind effects over such a distance was more art than science. Chen's breathing slowed as he entered his shooting trance. His heartbeat became visible through the rifle scope as tiny movements of the crosshairs, forcing him to time his shot between heartbeats. The target occasionally became visible as a dark shape moving behind rocks, but clear shots were rare and brief. "Wind is holding steady at our location," Jake whispered into his headset. "I'm seeing stronger movement in the valley, maybe 8 to 12 miles per hour from the northwest. Target area appears calmer, but there's heat shimmer that might indicate updrafts." Chen made minute adjustments to his scope, compensating for the estimated wind drift and bullet drop over the extreme distance. The mathematics involved were complex. He needed to account for air density, changes as the bullet traveled from 8,200 feet elevation down to approximately 7,600 feet where the target was located. Minutes passed as Chen waited for the perfect combination of conditions and opportunity. The enemy spotter moved periodically, sometimes disappearing completely behind rocks before reappearing in slightly different positions. Each potential shot window lasted only seconds before the target became obscured again. Jake's radio crackled with an update from the convoy. "Thunder Base, Convoy 6-4, passing Checkpoint Alpha. ETA to danger zone is 12 minutes. 12 minutes to eliminate a threat that experienced snipers would consider nearly impossible to engage." Chen had made long shots before, but never at this distance under these conditions with so much at stake. The pressure was enormous, but his training took over, helping him focus solely on the technical aspects of the shot. "I've got a brief window coming up," Chen whispered. "Target is moving toward a gap in the rocks. Jake, give me wind one more time." Jake scanned the entire route the bullet would travel, looking for any signs of changing conditions. A small dust devil was forming in the valley, but it appeared to be moving away from the bullet's path. The vegetation on the mountainside was swaying gently, indicating consistent but manageable wind from the northwest. Wind looked steady, northwest at approximately 10 miles per hour. No major changes visible along the flight path. Chen's crosshairs settled on the gap where the enemy spotter would appear. His breathing slowed to almost nothing, and his finger took up the slack in the trigger. Years of training condensed into the single moment where mathematics, skill, and intuition would determine whether American soldiers lived or died. The target appeared in the gap, exactly as Chen had predicted. For a brief moment, approximately 2 seconds, the enemy spotter was clearly visible through Chen's scope. It was now or never. Chen squeezed the trigger with steady, even pressure. The rifle recoiled against his shoulder, and the 338 Lapua Magnum round began its 4-second journey across the mountains. Jake watched through his spotting scope as the bullet arced through the thin mountain air, following a trajectory that seemed to defy gravity itself. But something went wrong. As the bullet reached the midpoint of its flight path, a sudden gust of wind that neither soldier had detected caught the round and pushed it off course. Jake watched in dismay as the bullet impacted rocks several meters to the left of the target, sending up a small cloud of dust and stone fragments. The enemy spotter immediately disappeared behind cover, now aware that American forces had detected his position. The element of surprise was lost, and Chen's best opportunity for making the shot had been wasted. With the convoy now only 10 minutes away from the potential ambush zone, their options were rapidly running out. Chen immediately began calculating adjustments for a follow-up shot, but the situation had changed dramatically. The enemy spotter now knew he was being targeted and would be much more careful about exposing himself. Additionally, the missed shot had revealed their exact position to any other hostile forces in the area, making the sniper team vulnerable to counterattack. "Jake, keep eyes on that position," Chen ordered as he worked his rifle's bolt to chamber a fresh round. "I need to know immediately if he shows himself again. Also scan for any other movement in the area. Where there's one spotter, there might be others." Jake pressed his eye back to the spotting scope, systematically scanning the rocky terrain where the enemy had been located. The impact point of Chen's bullet was clearly visible as fresh scarring on the rocks, approximately 3 meters left of where the target had been standing. The miss provided valuable information about wind conditions that hadn't been apparent from their observation point. "Sergeant, I think I can see why the shot went left," Jake said, studying the impact area carefully. "There's a gap between those two rock formations that creates a wind tunnel effect. I can see dust being channeled through there in a different pattern than the surrounding area." Chen nodded grimly as he adjusted his scope settings. The miss had been educational, but they might not get another clean shot. Professional snipers knew that the first shot was usually the best opportunity. Subsequent attempts were made against alerted targets who understood they were being hunted. Minutes passed with no sign of movement from the enemy position. Jake began to wonder if the spotter had retreated entirely, perhaps abandoning whatever mission he had been conducting. But that possibility created its own problems. If hostile forces were planning an ambush, the failed sniper shot might have triggered them to initiate their attack early. Suddenly, Jake's radio crackled with an urgent transmission from Convoy 6-4. "Thunder Base, we're taking small arms fire from elevated positions. Request immediate support. Grid reference approximately 235-189. The convoy was under attack at almost exactly the location where Jake had first spotted the enemy observer. The ambush was happening, and American soldiers were fighting for their lives in the valley below." Chen and Jake could hear the distant sound of gunfire echoing off the mountain walls, confirming that their worst fears had materialized. "Jake, can you see the convoy's position from there?" Chen asked while scanning through his rifle scope for targets. Jake swung his spotting scope toward the valley and quickly located the convoy. 3 armored vehicles had stopped in a defensive formation, with soldiers taking cover behind them, while engaging enemies positioned in the rocks above. Muzzle flashes were visible from multiple locations, indicating that the Americans were outnumbered and caught in a crossfire. "I can see them, but the range is even greater than our original target," Jake reported. "The convoy is approximately 300 meters from our position, and the enemy fighters are spread across multiple positions on the ridgeline above them." Chen cursed under his breath. Engaging targets at 3,200 meters was beyond the effective range of even the most advanced sniper rifles. The .338 Lapua Magnum round would retain enough energy to be lethal at that distance, but accuracy would be nearly impossible to guarantee. Missing could result in friendly fire incidents or simply waste precious ammunition. The radio continued crackling with updates from the convoy. "Multiple casualties. Need immediate medical evacuation. Enemy positions are too well concealed for our weapons to be effective. Requesting air support or artillery fire mission. Thunder 7, air support is still 30 minutes out," came the reply from base operations. "Artillery is repositioning to support you, but it will take 15 minutes to establish firing solutions. Hold your position and maintain suppressive fire." 15 minutes was an eternity for soldiers pinned down in an ambush. Chen knew from experience that firefights could be decided in seconds, not minutes. The convoy needed help immediately, not after artillery teams finished their calculations and air support finally arrived on station. Jake watched helplessly as the firefight continued in the valley below. Through his spotting scope, he could see American soldiers moving between vehicles trying to treat wounded comrades while maintaining defensive positions. The enemy fighters were well positioned and disciplined, firing in coordinated volleys that kept the Americans pinned down. "Sergeant, what if we tried a different approach?" Jake said suddenly. "Instead of trying to eliminate specific targets, what if we just tried to disrupt their coordinated fire? Even if we can't guarantee hits, accurate shots landing near their positions might force them to take cover and break up their attack pattern." Chen considered this tactical shift. Suppressive fire at extreme range wasn't standard sniper doctrine, but desperate situations called for creative solutions. If they could force some of the enemy fighters to abandon their positions or reduce their rate of fire, it might give the convoy enough breathing room to maneuver or call for extraction. "It's worth trying," Chen agreed. Start calling out the most active firing positions. I'll put rounds as close as I can to disrupt them. Jake began systematically identifying enemy positions based on muzzle flashes and movement. The first target was approximately 300 meters away, positioned behind a large boulder that provided excellent cover but limited mobility. Chen adjusted his scope for the extreme range and fired his first suppressive shot. The bullet impacted rocks just above the enemy position, sending stone fragments flying and forcing the fighter to duck for cover. For nearly 30 seconds, no shots came from that location, giving the Americans below a brief respite from one angle of attack. Good effect on target, Jake reported. That position has gone quiet. Next target is 200 meters to the right, firing from behind a fallen tree. Chen worked his bolt and lined up the next shot. His rifle was performing well at these extreme ranges, but he was burning through ammunition quickly. Sniper teams typically carried limited supplies, expecting to make each shot count rather than engaging in prolonged firefights. The second shot landed close enough to the target to achieve the desired suppressive effect. But Jake noticed something concerning through his spotting scope. One of the enemy positions had stopped firing not because they were being suppressed, but because they were repositioning to a different location. "Sergeant, we've got movement," Jake warned. "Looks like they're trying to flank the convoy's position. If they get established in those rocks to the south, they'll have clear shots at the Americans from a completely different angle." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Even if Chen could continue suppressing some enemy positions, others were adapting and maneuvering to maintain their advantage. The convoy needed more than temporary relief. They needed the threat eliminated or significantly reduced before air support could arrive. Jake made a decision that surprised both himself and Chen. Setting down his spotting scope, he reached for his rifle, the same M4 carbine that he had struggled with throughout training. His marksmanship scores had been mediocre, and he had never attempted a shot beyond 500 meters in training. "Jake, what are you doing?" Chen asked, momentarily distracted from his own shooting. "Sergeant, you keep working those established positions," Jake said, his voice calmer than he felt. "I'm going to try to slow down that flanking movement. Even if I can't hit them, maybe I can force them to take cover long enough for help to arrive." Chen wanted to argue, but the tactical situation left no time for debate. Jake was right that the flanking movement needed to be stopped, and Chen couldn't engage multiple targets simultaneously with his bolt-action rifle. Against his better judgment, he nodded toward Jake's rifle position. "Keep your shots high to avoid hitting friendlies," Chen warned. "And remember everything I taught you about breathing and trigger control. The fundamentals don't change just because the distance is extreme." Jake positioned himself behind his rifle, adjusting the bipod legs and checking his scope settings. The M4 carbine wasn't designed for long-range precision shooting like Chen's specialized sniper rifle, but it was the weapon Jake knew best from his limited training. The 556mm rounds he was using would lose significant energy over 3,000 meters, but they could still be effective for suppression. Through his scope, Jake could see the enemy fighters moving through the rocks in single file, attempting to reach a position that would give them clear shots at the convoy's southern flank. They were moving carefully but not frantically, suggesting they didn't realize they were being observed from the distant American position. Jake controlled his breathing exactly as Chen had taught him, inhaling deeply and then exhaling halfway before holding his breath steady. His heart rate had actually slowed despite the intensity of the situation, and he found himself entering a state of focused calm that felt surprisingly familiar. This was the same feeling he had experienced during his best practice sessions in training. The fundamentals of marksmanship were the same regardless of distance: proper sight alignment, smooth trigger control, and follow-through after the shot. Jake had practiced these basics thousands of times, even if he had never applied them at such extreme range. Muscle memory began taking over as his training overcame his nervousness. Jake's first shot was aimed at the lead fighter in the flanking movement. He held his crosshair slightly above the target to compensate for bullet drop, and squeezed the trigger with steady pressure. The rifle recoiled against his shoulder, and he immediately worked the charging handle to chamber another round while watching for impact through his scope. The bullet struck rocks approximately 2 meters in front of the target, sending up a shower of stone fragments. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The entire group of fighters immediately took cover, abandoning their movement toward the flanking position. Jake's shot had been a miss in terms of hitting a specific target, but it was perfectly successful as suppressive fire. "Good shooting, Jake," Chen called out between his own shots. "That group has gone to ground. Keep pressure on them while I work the main firing positions." Encouraged by his first attempt, Jake began engaging the flanking group systematically. He wasn't trying to achieve precision hits at impossible range, but rather to create a zone of danger that the enemy fighters couldn't safely cross. Each shot forced them to remain in cover, preventing them from reaching their intended position. The radio crackled with an update from the convoy. "Thunder Base. Enemy fire has decreased significantly from the northern positions. We're still taking casualties, but the pressure has been reduced. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." Jake felt a surge of confidence as he realized his suppressive fire was making a real difference. The convoy was still in danger, but his shots were helping to save American lives. He began firing more aggressively, placing rounds near any position where he detected movement or muzzle flashes. Chen was achieving similar results with his more powerful rifle, forcing several enemy positions to cease firing temporarily. Working together, the two-man sniper team was managing to disrupt the coordinated ambush that had initially trapped the convoy. The Americans in the valley below were beginning to maneuver more freely, treating their wounded and consolidating their defensive positions. But the situation changed again when Jake noticed something alarming through his scope. One of the enemy fighters had produced what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade, RPG, a weapon that could destroy the convoy's armored vehicles and kill multiple soldiers with a single shot. The fighter was positioning himself behind a large rock formation approximately 3,400 meters from Jake's location. "Sergeant, I've got an RPG gunner setting up in the rocks at bearing 285 degrees, Jake reported urgently. "Range approximately 300-400 meters. He's got a clear shot at the convoy if he gets that weapon operational." Chen swung his rifle toward the indicated position and quickly located the threat. The range was at the absolute limit of his rifle's capability, and the target was partially concealed behind rocks that would make a precision shot extremely difficult. Additionally, RPG attacks could be executed quickly once the operator was ready, giving them very little time to prevent the launch. "I see him, but I don't have a clear shot," Chen reported. "He's positioned behind cover that blocks most of his body. I might get a chance when he moves to fire the RPG, but that could be too late to save the convoy." Jake studied the target through his own scope, calculating angles and distances with the systematic approach Chen had taught him. The RPG operator was indeed well protected, but Jake noticed something that Chen might have missed due to the different angle of his firing position. From Jake's location, there was a narrow gap between two rock formations that would provide a brief window of opportunity when the RPG operator moved to his firing position. The shot would be extraordinarily difficult, over 3,400 meters at a partially concealed target, but it might be their only chance to prevent a catastrophic attack on the convoy. "Sergeant, I think I might have an angle on that RPG gunner," Jake said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was considering. "There's a gap in the rocks that lines up from my position. When he moves to fire, I might have a 2-second window." Chen looked at Jake with mixture of concern and respect. The young soldier had performed well with suppressive fire, but attempting a precision shot at over 3,400 meters was a completely different challenge. Even experienced snipers would consider such a shot nearly impossible, especially with a standard infantry rifle instead of specialized long-range equipment. "Jake, that's an extremely difficult shot," Chen said carefully. "The range is beyond what your rifle is designed for, and you've never attempted anything close to that distance in training. Are you sure you want to try this?" Jake considered the question seriously. He knew his limitations as a marksman, and he understood that attempting this shot carried enormous responsibility. If he missed, the RPG operator would still be able to attack the convoy. If his shot was wildly inaccurate, he might accidentally hit American positions in the valley below. But Jake also knew that someone had to try. Air support was still minutes away and artillery was still positioning to engage. The convoy couldn't wait for perfect solutions. They needed someone to take action immediately. "Regardless of the odds of success, Sergeant, I know the chances aren't good," Jake replied, settling more firmly behind his rifle. "But those soldiers in the convoy don't have anyone else right now. If I don't try this shot, that RPG gunner is going to kill Americans. I'd rather miss trying to save them than not try at all." Chen nodded slowly, recognizing the courage and logic in Jake's decision. This was exactly the kind of moment that separated good soldiers from exceptional ones, the willingness to attempt the impossible when lives were at stake. Jake began his pre-shot routine with methodical precision, applying every lesson Chen had taught him during their weeks of training together. He checked his rifle's zero, estimated the wind conditions along the entire bullet path, and calculated the extreme elevation adjustment needed for a shot at 300-400 meters. The mathematics were complex, but Chen had taught him to trust the fundamentals. Even when the numbers seemed impossible, the bullet drop over such distance would be enormous, approximately 45 feet of vertical drop that needed to be compensated through precise scope adjustment. Jake's rifle scope wasn't designed for such extreme ranges, forcing him to hold his crosshairs significantly above the target and rely on instinct and experience to judge the correct holdover. Jake, remember that at this distance the bullet will be in flight for nearly 5 seconds, Chen advised quietly. The target might move during that time and wind conditions can change along the entire path. You'll need to predict where he'll be when the bullet arrives, not just where he is when you fire. Jake nodded, studying the RPG operator's movement patterns through his scope. The enemy fighter was methodically preparing his weapon, checking the rocket-propelled grenade and adjusting his position behind the rocks. Based on his movements, Jake estimated that the operator would need approximately 2 minutes to complete his setup before being ready to fire at the convoy. The wind conditions were challenging, but not impossible. Jake could see dust and debris moving at various elevations between his position and the target, indicating shifting air currents that would affect bullet trajectory. The morning sun was creating thermal updrafts from the heated rocks, adding another variable to an already complex equation. Jake made minute adjustments to his scope, dialing in as much elevation as the equipment would allow, and then calculating the additional holdover he would need. His breathing slowed naturally as he entered the focused state that had served him well during training. All the noise and chaos of the firefight seemed to fade away, leaving only the clear image in his scope and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Wind appears steady from the northwest at approximately 12 miles per hour, Jake whispered to Chen. I'm seeing some thermal activity in the middle distance, but it doesn't look severe enough to drastically affect the shot. Chen watched through his own scope as Jake prepared for what would likely be the longest shot attempted by an American soldier in this sector of Afghanistan. The range exceeded anything in the training manuals, and the target was partially concealed behind cover that would make even a perfect shot difficult to achieve. Jake, when you're ready, control your breathing and trust your training, Chen said. Don't overthink the shot. Your fundamentals are solid and you've got good instincts. Sometimes the impossible shots are the ones that work because nobody expects them to succeed. The RPG operator moved into position exactly as Jake had predicted, stepping into the narrow gap between rocks to line up his shot at the convoy below. This was the window Jake had been waiting for, approximately 2 seconds when the target would be visible and stationary before launching his attack on American forces. Jake's crosshairs settled on a point nearly 8 feet above the target's head, compensating for the extreme bullet drop over 3,400 meters. His breathing stopped at the natural pause between exhale and inhale, and his finger applied steady pressure to the trigger. Every lesson from basic training, every hour of practice, and every piece of advice from Chen crystallized into this single moment. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed off the surrounding mountains. Jake maintained his sight picture and watched through his scope as the 5.56-millimeter bullet began its impossibly long journey through the thin mountain air. The recoil pushed the rifle against his shoulder, but he immediately brought the scope back on target to observe the impact. For what seemed like an eternity, nothing happened. The bullet was invisible during its flight, traveling at over 2,800 feet per second, but still requiring nearly 5 seconds to cover the enormous distance to the target. Jake held his breath as he watched the RPG operator continue his preparation, unaware that death was approaching from over 2 miles away. Then, with shocking suddenness, the bullet arrived exactly where Jake had aimed. The impact was clearly visible through his scope. The enemy fighter simply collapsed behind his weapon, the RPG clattering unused against the rocks. The shot had been perfect, connecting at a distance that would have challenged the world's best snipers using the most advanced equipment available. Chen stared through his own scope in complete disbelief. He had witnessed thousands of shots during his military career, including some remarkable long-distance kills by expert marksmen, but nothing had prepared him for what he had just seen. An inexperienced soldier with basic equipment had just made a shot that should have been mathematically impossible. "Target down," Jake reported calmly into his radio, as if he had just completed a routine training exercise. "RPG threat eliminated." The convoy's radio immediately crackled with confused responses. "Thunder 7, did you say the RPG threat is eliminated? We didn't see any artillery or airstrikes in that area." "Confirmed," Chen replied, his voice filled with amazement. "Single shot from Thunder 7. Target neutralized at 3D 400 meters. There was a long silence on the radio before the convoy commander responded. "Thunder 7, did you say 3D 400 meters? Please confirm that distance." "Distance confirmed at 3D 400 meters, Chen replied. "Shot fired by Private Martinez with standard M4 carbine." The radio chatter that followed revealed the shock and disbelief of everyone monitoring the frequency. Soldiers throughout the region had heard about long-distance shots made by specialized sniper teams, but none had ever witnessed anything approaching Jake's achievement. The mathematics alone seemed to defy the capabilities of standard infantry weapons. But the immediate tactical situation still required attention. While Jake's incredible shot had eliminated the RPG threat, enemy fighters were still engaging the convoy from other positions. Chen and Jake continued their suppressive fire mission, working systematically to neutralize the remaining threats until air support finally arrived 15 minutes later. Apache helicopters swept through the valley with devastating effectiveness, using their advanced sensors and weapon systems to eliminate the remaining enemy positions. Within minutes, the ambush was completely broken, and the convoy was able to continue its mission safely. American casualties were limited to minor wounds that could be treated in the field. As the immediate danger passed, Jake sat back from his rifle and tried to process what had just happened. The shot that would make him famous throughout the military had felt surprisingly natural. In the moment, just an application of the fundamentals Chen had taught him combined with the calm focus he had always possessed under pressure. Chen approached Jake with an expression of complete bewilderment mixed with profound respect. In 12 years of military service and hundreds of combat engagements, he had never seen anything comparable to what his inexperienced spotter had just accomplished. "Jake, do you understand what you just did?" Chen asked. "That shot will be talked about in sniper schools for decades. You just made the longest confirmed kill in this theater of operations using equipment that wasn't designed for anything." Close to that range, Jake looked up at his sergeant with the same quiet humility he had shown throughout training. The magnitude of his achievement was beginning to sink in, but his primary emotion was relief that the convoy was safe and American lives had been saved. "Sergeant, I just did what you taught me," Jake replied simply. "Stay calm, trust the fundamentals, and take the shot when it matters most. The distance doesn't change the basics." Word of Jake's impossible shot spread rapidly through military channels. Within hours, officers from brigade headquarters were requesting detailed reports about the engagement. Ballistics experts wanted to analyze the factors that had made such an extreme shot successful. Training commands wanted to study Jake's techniques and background to understand how an inexperienced marksman had achieved what seasoned professionals considered impossible. The official measurement, confirmed by GPS coordinates and multiple witnesses, established Jake's shot at exactly 3,700 meters, nearly 400 meters beyond the previous record for longest confirmed kill in the Afghan theater. The achievement was even more remarkable considering it had been made with standard infantry equipment, rather than specialized sniper rifles designed for extreme long-range work. Jake Martinez, the young soldier from Chicago who had struggled to hit targets at 300 meters during basic training, had just redefined what was considered possible in military marksmanship. His impossible shot at 3,700 meters would become legendary among soldiers, proof that sometimes courage and determination could overcome any limitation.